2002 Honda Accord transmission replacement. I'm Brian Nessa from How To Automotive. I'm going to walk you through the steps of replacing this transmission. To get started, I'm going to remove the battery itself. So I'm going to remove the cables, the hold downs, and remove the battery out. So after getting the battery out, we're going to go ahead and take out all the little plastic trays and everything. In a little bit, we're going to take out the bottom battery tray, but for right now, what we're going to do is we're going to get all this out of our way. So we're going to start by removing the covers, turning these clips, half turn, pop off, and removing the air inlet and the top lid for the air cleaner. Go ahead and remove all that, and then make sure you'll pop out all the little grommets and unplug the hoses that go into the air snorkel. After getting the air cleaner assembly out, now I'm going to take the overflow bottle for the radiator here and just lift straight up. And then I'm just going to basically set it aside over here. Now you can go ahead and remove the 6 12mm bolts to hold the battery tray down, and the one little 10mm bolt that held the battery. Go ahead and remove the 12mm bolt here and remove this part of the battery tray and set that aside. Now that the battery tray is out, now I'm going to remove the starter next. So I'm going to pop off the cable, the boot here, pull the cable off, the little wire here. Then I'll remove the main bolts for the starter here. So there'll be one here, and then you'll take like a long extension and you'll go underneath the starter and get to the other bolt and remove the 2 bolts and remove the starter out. And this is the setup for my removing the bottom bolt on the starter, and I'll use the same setup for the top bolt. The starter's out. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to start here below where the starter was. I'm going to unplug the 2 solenoid packs there, unplug those. Then I'm going to remove here the ground cables here, and then I'm going to start unplugging everything from down here, and I'm going to work my way. So if you look at me on this side, I'm going to work my way around the transmission like that, unplugging every electrical connector on the transmission. So unplug them all, and then if they have these little wire loom or little catches here that hold the wire looms together, I'm going to pop those out. This main wire loom here is free and loose. You're also going to have to remove brackets. So there's the bracket here that you could hook a chain to lift the, that the manufacturer uses. So it's going to have a couple of long 14mm bolts like this. So you'll remove that there, and there's going to be one a little further in. So there's going to be one a little further in right here. You remove that, and then that'll give you a little free play. And then also on the thermostat housing right there, there's going to be a 10mm bolt with the ground wires. Remove the 10mm bolt. You're not going to remove the thermostat housing, just the ground wires mounted to it. After you get the 10mm off of the ground strap and the front of this main harness unbolted from the bracket here, you're going to follow it around, and then you're going to look for a 10mm bolt right there and remove that. Okay, after you unplug this solenoid pack here, you'll have to reach around back, and there's a little tab that's on this connector, and you pop it up, and you have to pop it off the little black harness here. Okay, now the harness is getting pretty free, where you can start maneuvering it around. Okay, but before we continue moving around the other side, we need to disconnect the ground cable here on the transmission that's mounted to the body of the car. So just disconnect it there, and you can go ahead and also remove your transmission cooler lines. So go ahead and pop those off. So after getting the ground cable disconnected and the cooler lines disconnected, now on the back side of this main plug, there's a few more electrical connectors. So you'll reach around back, and you'll look around back, and you'll see them, and you go ahead and unplug those. After you get the connectors on the back side disconnected, on the far back towards the firewall, there's another connector here that you're going to probably reach around like this and squeeze, and then pop it off like that. And then that's pretty much going to be it for electrical connectors, but when you take it out, you want to go slow and make sure that you didn't forget anything or leave anything. So now this harness is just going to basically stay like this in the car, and the transmission is going to drop out below. And so now what we're going to do to get prepared for that is we're going to start removing some of the transmission bolts up here. And there's going to be one here on the left side of the thermostat, and then on the right side of the thermostat there'll be another 17mm bolt right there. Remove those 2. And then down at the very corner down there by the engine mount, you can kind of see it's painted blue. There's another bolt here. Go ahead and remove that. I also wanted to point out this main connector back here in the back by the firewall. After you unplug it, you actually need to take this part of the connector off and on the bottom of it, you can see it has a little tab. You'll flip it with your finger and then pull it off the bracket like that. And sometimes they get stuck, and if yours gets stuck, then I would recommend taking the 12mm bolt here and then the 12mm bolt here, and just take the bracket off, and that'll free up the harness so it'll float like this. So when you go to take the tranny out. So now we're about ready to lift the car up, but before we do, we're going to take off one more bolt, which is going to be the top engine mount right here. Just take the 19mm bolt off. Then we're going to lift the vehicle up in the air and go ahead and remove both front tires. Okay, now that I got it up in the air, I'm going to go ahead and drain the transmission. So I'm going to remove the drain plug here on the bottom. Go ahead and remove that and drain it while it's draining. So while the transmission is draining, I'm going to go ahead and remove this the shield that goes around. So I'm going to start on the driver's side, just start removing the clips and popping the clips out all the way around. I'll follow it all the way around until this whole lower shield is off. So I'm looking at this one, and it looks like we got to take the, well, I knew we were going to take the subframe out, but it looks like we're going to have to take the rack and pinion out with it too, because it's mounted onto the subframe. In some cars you can leave the rack and pinion in the car, and sometimes you have to take them out. So on this particular one, we're going to remove the rack and pinion with it too. So what we need to do is lower this vehicle back. So in our next steps, we're going to be removing the subframe out. So what I went ahead and did was put on my my support brace here. So it hooks onto the fender braces here, like this. It goes across, and then we need to support the back side of the engine. So what I do is I wrap the chain around the throttle body, being sure not to pinch any of the sensors, cables, or anything like that. And I just wrapped it around it and hooked it onto my J-hook here, and then I tightened it and pulled the slack up into it. Actually, it's kind of lifting the engine up a little bit. We don't have to worry about the front of the motor because it has a motor mount, and we're not going to remove that. So the front of the motor is going to be supported. So the power steering, rack and pinion, and everything is going to come out with the subframe. So one of the things we need to do is go ahead and remove the power steering hose here, the pressure line, remove the 2 bolts here, and then follow it back, and it has a bracket here. You need to remove that bracket, and as you lower it down, you're going to feed this down with it out the car. Also inside the car, we're going to disconnect the steering coupler. So you want to make sure your steering wheel is straight, in the straight position, and if you have an ability to lock it, that way it doesn't spin on you, and you don't want to break the clock spring that's in here. If you can lock it in place, that'd be great. To get to the steering coupler, what we're going to do is we're going to peel our carpet back a little bit like this and remove these little plastic nuts that are on this little cover here. So one here, and then we're going to take this plastic cover off, and it has like a little clip on the back side up here, and you'll flare it, and it'll unflare and come off. So the cover will look like this, and it had 3 of those little plastic nuts. So take that off and set it aside. So now you can see the steering coupler, but I had to turn my steering wheel slightly to the right to get to the bolt. So we're going to loosen the top one, and then with the bottom one, we're going to take the bolt completely out. And then what we'll do is we'll slide the whole coupler. After you get the bottom bolt out and this one loose, you'll slide the whole coupler up and off. And then after that, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to position my steering wheel back. I'll recenter the steering wheel and try to lock it in place. That way it doesn't spin on me while I'm working on the car, and it doesn't damage the clock spring that's in here. After you get the coupler off, you just swing it, you just push it upwards like this, and then you just swing it out of your way like that. So now you can go ahead and remove the bolt for the motor mount on the front of the car, and then on the back here underneath the heater hoses there is another motor mount. Just go ahead and remove the top bolt for that one too. You'll also want to disconnect this one vacuum hose that goes down. And this vacuum hose actually goes to the 2 engine mounts. So we want to just unplug it from the vacuum switch here. Now that I got the steering coupler up there, disconnect it, and the engine supported up there, I'm going to go ahead and what I'm going to do is work on getting the axles out of the car. So I'm going to remove the cotter pins, remove the 17mm bolt here, remove the bolt, nut and bolt here for the wishbone. What I'm going to do is screw the nut back on just a little bit, a couple threads. Then I'm going to take a large hammer and I'm going to strike it right here, kind of like that. I'll strike it several times, and what that'll do is it'll pop the ball joint free without damaging the ball joint there. So once you get it popped, just lift the arm out like that. So once you get the ball joint popped out, you can go ahead and push your axle through and pull the suspension out. What I like to do to help me with that is use a tie strap like this and hook it to the caliper and hook it to my rack over here and just pull it out of my way. Now the axle's free. Now I'll use a pry bar and I'll pry the lower control arm down and I'll take the wishbone of the strut and slip it over on this side so it'll look like that. So you're going to do this for both sides. On the passenger side axle, there's a little bracket that if you look right here, there's a bearing in the middle of it. So on the top of it, if you rotate around, there's a couple bolts. There's a couple bolts there that you need to remove. It's like 3 bolts. You'll remove those 3 bolts, and then you can take the axle and slide the axle out of the car. You get the driver's side popped out and the spindle pushed over. Then all you're going to do is put a pry bar between the transmission and pop the axle out. Now that the axles are out, on the back of the oil pan here is a little plate. I'm going to take the 2 tins out and remove the plate. Now I got a ratchet on the crank pulley here. And I'm going to rotate the engine until I can line up and so when one of these bolts line up, and then I'll remove it. This is for the flex plate. And it's bolting it to the torque converter on the transmission. After I remove it, I'll rotate the crank until the next one lines up, and I'll remove the next bolt and keep going until there's no more bolts left. After removing the 8 10mm bolts that were holding the flex plate on, now I'm going to put the focus to the transmission mounts, which in the subframe up here is 2 14mm bolts here, and then slightly over here 2 14mm bolts. Go ahead and remove all 4 of those. The next step was we need to get this cross exhaust pipe out. So you're going to remove the 3 bolts here in the front of the engine, follow it back, the pipe that goes up to the back cylinder. You're going to remove the 3 bolts from there. You're also going to unplug your oxygen sensor, and it's going to be connected to the little metal bracket. Unplug it from the bracket. And then after that, there's going to be 3 bolts on the mounting where the mounts to the cat. Remove the 3 bolts there, and then the 2 bolts that hold the hold down. So we're just about ready to start removing the subframe out of the car, but before we do that, we need to pop the tie rods off, the outer tie rods off. So we're going to take the cotter pins out here, take the bolt off, and then we're going to use our big hammer again, and we're going to strike it on the end of the spindle right here, and that'll pop the joint free without damaging the boot. And we're going to do that on both sides. Okay, now that we got our tie rods popped off, the next step before we take the subframe out is to remove the shift cable itself. So I'm going to start by removing the 12mm bolt here and here, and taking this cover off, and then taking the 2 tins out here. So there turned out to be 3 bolts on the covers, 1 here, and 1 up here, and then the 2 tins. After removing those, you can go ahead and you have to bend these little tabs back here. So you'll bend them back, unflare them. Those are kind of like little safety tabs so the bolt doesn't back itself back out. After you get those bent back with a little flat blade screwdriver, take the 10mm bolt out here, and then you can slide the shift cable off the transmission. So I'm getting ready to unbolt the subframe and start lowering it down. Before I did, what I did is I took my transmission jack here, and I put it on the driver's side here, centered it in the subframe here. I got a pull jack here with a block of wood under the oil pan. I'm going to lift the engine up a little bit just to give it a little extra support. Even though I do have that brace up top, I just want to have a little extra support as I start lowering this down until I can 100% trust everything. And then on the right side here, on the passenger side here, I got another pull jack on the subframe, and I'm going to center it here in the middle here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start unbolting this, and I'll lower the 2 pull jacks on the right and on the left. I'll start lowering those down and leave the one holding the oil pan alone. So I'm going to start here in the front of the car, and the big subframe bolts here. I'm going to take them about 3/4 of the way out, not all the way out. So I'll take this one out all the way and then thread it back in a few threads, and then leave it, and then I'll do the same for the driver's side front, and I'll take it out and then thread it back in a few threads. So the reason why I do this is I'm going to start lowering this subframe down slowly. You always forget something. There's always a little wire loom or something always potentially there to snag, or you can't see because it's underneath something. So as you start slowly lowering this frame down, you kind of look up above and you kind of keep double checking. And then once you're clear that everything's disconnected from it, then you can go ahead and remove all the bolts and slow it down. So now that I got the 2 front ones unbolted, I'm gonna move around to the back, and then I'm gonna do the same thing with these 2 back ones here. So I'm gonna lower the bolt here, the main bolt here, and the main bolt here. And even then, the subframe's not gonna come down until we start lowering this bolt here, which is just above the lower control arm. And it's the same on the opposite side. So for right now, remove the bolt here on both sides. So now that these bolts have been backed out about 3/4 of the way, now I'm gonna take a long extension and go up here, and I'm gonna basically loosen this bolt here about 3/4 of the way and keep the tranny jack pushing it upwards. And I will do the same thing on the opposite side. So now that I got the bolt out, now I'm gonna go ahead and start lowering the pull jack, or the transmission jack here, and lowering the subframe down. And as you can see, it's creeping down. So now as I lower it down, I'm gonna continuously look and check and see if there's anything left connected up. As you can see, the transmission is free from the frame now. And I'm gonna do the same thing for the passenger side. So I'll slowly lower this pull jack down, screw it down until the bolts are touching like this. And now it looks like this this transmission cooler line here is hooked up to the radiator. So I'm gonna disconnect this. So I'm gonna go ahead and disconnect the hose that's right here in the right front corner right here. It's hard mounted onto the subframe, but I'm gonna leave it mounted there and just disconnect it here. So as I was lowering it down, I saw that I left the high pressure power steering sensor plugged in, so we want to unplug that. You got to remember the high pressure hose, we unhooked it before, it's going to come down with it. And then mine is also kind of getting snagged on the upper mount here. So if it persists and it won't come out, I'm going to put a pry bar here and try to pry it. And I got the bolts pretty much completely out, all 6 of the main bolts, and it's just hovering on the pull jacks and the transmission jack here, but it's kind of getting stuck on the mount here. So I'm gonna pry it here and see if it won't pop free. Then I'll be forced to. What I'll do is I'll take the 3 bolts off here for the motor mount here that mounts it to the block, and that'll definitely make it free where the subframe will come down. So after you double check and make sure that you didn't leave anything plugged in, as you can see, you know, the steering coupler and everything is free. It's all coming down as one piece. So that top engine mount back here, it just got stuck on the studs and it just wouldn't come off. The little angle changed or whatever, it wouldn't come off. So I went ahead and just removed the 4 bolts. There's 2 here, 1 here, and then 1 on the back side over here. I went ahead and removed those. And now with that removed, we should be able to just start lowering the pull jacks and the tranny jack here, and keep double checking for anything that may be still connected, and just slowly lower it down. And once you get it down to an area where you can see all the way through and you know that nothing's hooked up, then you can you and your buddies or co-workers can finish lowering the subframe all the way down, and then you can maneuver it out of your way. So as you can see, I got the subframe about 80% out of the car now, but it was catching the cat right here on the front. So I had to slide the rope. Luckily my tranny jack here has wheels on it, and I was able to roll it forward a couple inches to clear the, and now that I'm clear, I'll continue lowering it down, and then I'll have somebody get, you know, a couple guys get on each corner and lower the thing all the way down to the ground. So now I've lowered the subframe all the way down to the ground, and I left the pull jack here supporting the engine just for additional support. I slid the floor, then I slid the subframe up against the pull jack. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my transmission jack here, kind of just positioned the transmission jack like this around the subframe, and then jacked it up underneath the transmission. Now the transmission is supported by the transmission jack. Now I'm going to finish taking out the rest of the bolts and then we'll pull the transmission back an inch or so and then drop the transmission out of the car. To get the remainder bolts, first thing we need to do is take this top, the engine mount perch over here off. So there's going to be a bolt on top right here and then right here. Okay, after removing the motor mount, then you're going to go ahead and remove the two 14mm bolts that go into the oil, through the oil pan into the transmission. Remove those 2 bolts. Then you're going to remove the 2 17mm bolts here on the back of the transmission, going through the engine block into the transmission. And once those are all removed, the transmission should be free. You just maybe get a little pry bar and work it off the dowel pins and set it on your tranny jack and then lower the transmission out of the car. So now that the old transmission's out, what I like to do is take the new transmission, put them side by side, and then look and see if it comes with any of the brackets or anything that's missing, like or doesn't come with your new transmission, and transfer over those parts. So on my particular transmission, it did not come with these metal tubes that go to the transmission coolers. So I'm going to transfer those over, and then also you're going to transfer your mounts. They don't come with the mounts. And just check and see if yours come with all the brackets or whatever. Mine didn't come with a dipstick, so I got to use the old dipstick. So once you get all the little brackets or whatever transferred over, the next step we're going to do is we're going to flush the transmission cooler lines before we put the new transmission in. Okay, the way I flush out the transmission cooler is I take a shop rag like this, and I'll put it over one hose, and it's just a loop going through. So what you do is you take compressed air, and you're going to need a bucket like this to catch the blow gun, and I'm going to initially blow it out with my blow gun. So I got the going directly into one hose, and then I got my other hose with a rag over the top like this, and I'm going to blow it until all the most of the fluids come out of it, and it'll drain into my oil bucket. Then after that, we're going to take brake clean, and we're going to spray brake clean into this hose and spray a ton of it into the hose, and then we'll use the compressed air again and blow the air through with the same thing with the rag over. And we'll keep doing that until only brake clean comes out of this end. No more transmission fluid comes out, just clear brake clean. And then after that, we'll just continue blowing it out until there's nothing coming out but just air. Also, you want to check for the dowel pins and make sure they didn't come out. Sometimes they'll come out of the block and they'll stick into the transmission, so make sure they're still in there. And after you transfer all your brackets and stuff over and sensors that your transmission may or may not come on, we're going to put it back on the transmission jack it back up in here, and put it on and line up the dowel pin holes. So after you get the transmission put back in and line back up on the dowel pins, like I said, I recommend you start the bolt here, start it by hand, and then on the front side over here, start this bolt here by hand. All right, so now that you got your transmission stabbed back onto the dowel pins and you got the bolt here started and here on the corner started, then you can go ahead and draw the transmission up until it's flush with the engine block, and go ahead and start installing the other bolt here, and then the 2 bolts on the bottom of the oil pan. Go ahead and bolt those up. One tip for you is I recommend that you check your paperwork. Some of the new transmissions come dry. You may be required to put fluid into the torque converter before you bolt it up. So check your paperwork with wherever you got it, depending if you're putting in a used, a brand new, or a remanufactured transmission. So check your paperwork, or talk to the whoever you got the transmission from to find out if the fluid's already in the torque converter, or if it's that way when you go to refill it, you don't have to you put the proper amount in, or you don't overfill it. Also, when we were taking the transmission out, I climbed back up top, and the support bracket that we put across the engine that is actually holding the tail of the engine in, I went ahead and lowered that down a little bit, and then lowered and so I got the engine at an angle like this to help get the transmission in and out, and also restab it. So now that we got the transmission bolted back up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift the transmission jack up and lift the engine and transmission to its level, and then take my pole jack here and then re-support it again. And once it's all level, then I'll go back up top with a ladder, and I'll take the slack out of it, and that way the engine and tranny are level. And then when we put the subframe back in, it'll go in nice. Now that the transmission and engine is level again, I went ahead and had my help from the guys in the shop lift the subframe back up and set it back onto the transmission jack and onto my pole jack here, and I got them balancing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to slowly screw it up inch by inch, you know, on the left side, and then go over to the right side and keep creeping it up. And you'll have to maneuver it left, right, in and out. And you're just going to creep it up until it's high enough where you can start one of these bolts here, the long bolts in the corner. And I'll get them all started in the corners, on all 4 corners. And also you want to take your high pressure hose to connect it to your rack and pinion, and you want to feed it up and over the valve cover like that. And also there's the vacuum line that controls your motor mounts that you unplugged, and you want to try to remember to feed the vacuum line up too as you raise this up. As you raise it up and clear the cat, you'll have to bring the subframe back over the cat a little bit. So you also may want to keep your buddies close by to help maneuver that thing. And I'm gonna leave the mount on here, because I unbolted it from the block, and then I'll start the bolts on the block and resecure that once the subframe is bolted up. So after very slowly, inch by inch, raising the subframe back into place and kind of looking through and guiding things through like hoses and stuff like that, once you get it up high enough, what I recommend the first thing you do is stab the ball joint on the and put the nut on, because you'll definitely reach the ball joint first. And then once you do that, then you got something secure, like it's bolted in, and then you keep inching it up. And then before you get to on the passenger side, before you get the subframe up high enough, I recommend you put the hose back on right here, and as you jack it up, and then start the bolts, jack it up and start the bolts. So what I do is I get it up high enough like this, and I start the bolts in one corner, and then I maneuver the whole thing around, and I just start all 4 corners, and then I don't run them all the way up. I just start them a few threads by hand. Make sure you do it by hand. You don't want to cross thread these bolts in here. And then once it's I got all 4 corners secured, then I'll slowly jack it up, tighten one bolt, and keep working around in like clockwise or counterclockwise pattern, and hit all the corners until the subframe is drawn all the way up until it's touching the body. And also you're going to have to guide your motor mounts and all that stuff. You got to keep that in mind. So after using the pole jacks and tranny jack to lift the subframe up in place, start the bolts in all 4 corners, I drew the subframe up by hand, tightening the bolts and then lifting the jack stands and tranny jack, and kept doing it until everything touches the body. Now I got all 6 of my bolts started, and so I got 3 on this side and 3 on the passenger side. And now they're all tightened. I'm going to torque the middle bolt here, 76 foot-pounds, and then I'll do the opposite side, and then I'll do the back, 76 foot-pounds. This one at 76 foot-pounds, and then I'll go to the front, 76 foot-pounds, and 76 foot-pounds. So next I went ahead and started the 4 bolts and tightened them up for the motor mount. And the way I lined them up is I used the pole jack and lift the transmission up or down or whatever to align everything up. And now once you get those started, then now that the mount's resecured, the subframe's resecured, I'm gonna go ahead and install the 8 bolts to hold the torque converter and the flex plate together, and torque them down. They torque down to 9 foot-pounds. So I'll start one, run it in, and torque it down to 9 foot-pounds. And I use the crank pulley to rotate it and also to hold it. And I'll just rotate it around so all the bolts are installed. Also on the torque converter bolts, I recommend that you use some type of thread locker on it, here at How To Automotive, we like to use Permanex thread locker, and then this helps prevent the bolts from backing back out and coming back off. So just put a few dabs on the threads, and then thread them into the block, and you're going to torque them down to 9. The torque converter, rebolt it back up, and go ahead and put the cover back on and bolt it up. Next, I'm going to put the shift cable back on and bolt it up. Put the shift cable through, then you're going to put the screw and the little lock tab keeper in there back in. We're going to make sure you don't lose this little safety tab. After putting the shifter on, running the bolt through, I'm going to bend the little ears on the safety tab over with a pair of pliers. That way the bolt doesn't back off. So you'll bend it over on both sides. Now we're going to put the cover back on. The cable is reinstalled. I'm going to turn my attention to the passenger side axle. Tied my suspension back out of the way. I pulled my wishbone part of the strut over onto the towards the front of the car. So now I'm going to put the axle in through here and tilt it up, and then slide it in and stab it into the axle. Stabbed into the transmission, and you got the little mount here flipped into place. You got to put the 3 bolts in and tighten them down. But one of the bolts out of the 3 are different. So the 2 with the shoulders, they go on the bottom, and the one without the shoulder goes on the top. After the 3 bolts are tight, then you can take your suspension here, caliper, and pull it out of the way. Go ahead and swing your suspension out of the way and stab your axle through the spindle. And then once you get that through, start the nut by hand. Once you get the nut and spindle through, you can lift it up and stab your ball joint back into the lower control. The ball joint stabbed, go ahead and stab your wishbone, put the bolt through and the nut on. And you can also go ahead and put on your outer tie rod and nut. And you can tighten the outer tie rod down and torque it down to 43 foot-pounds, and then put a new cotter pin in. Then you're going to tighten the lower ball joint to 43 foot-pounds and put a new cotter pin in. And then you can go ahead and tighten the wishbone bolt through. I don't know what the spec is on that, you just tighten it. And then after that, you'll tighten the axle nut to 181. Getting the axle nut torqued, bend in the little tab that's in the notch on the axle. That prevents it from backing back out. And you're going to duplicate the same process for the driver's side. The only difference is you're not going to have the 3 bolts that have the mount. You're just going to stab the axle. Now we're going to reinstall our exhaust. So you're going to change your gaskets on the end here, the one here and the one here. And then you're going to stab this end first onto the cat right here. Stab it onto this end. Then you're going to swing the nose up and then start the 3 bolts here and then start the 3 bolts. After starting all the exhaust bolts and tightening them up, then I went ahead and installed the hanger bolt. And mine had the little spacer here. So I put the spacer in. I had to kind of bend or flex the little mount out of the way, put the spacer in, slide the bolt through, and then I had to use my pry bar to kind of move it back and forth to line it all up. I'll start the bolt there and then the bolt here and tighten them. I'm going to plug in my oxygen sensor and route the wire through the way into the little looms that it goes into. The oxygen sensors rerouted and plugged back in. So you're also going to make sure you got the power steering hose, the high pressure line. If you reach over the back like this, you can plug it in. Make sure that's plugged in, and then kind of do a walk around and make sure that everything you can remember or you unplugged it, unbolted is bolted back up. As you can see, my motor mounts, my transmission mount are floating still because I still have the hoist on the top. So what I'm going to do now, after I double check that everything is plugged back in, is I'm going to lower the car down and go ahead and I'm going to put a floor jack underneath here. The vehicle back down, and I got a floor jack just sitting underneath the transmission, and I've got the tail of the transmission just lifted up a little bit. Now I'm going to go ahead and remove my support bracket here. Okay, now that I got my engine crane off, I'm going to go ahead and lower the transmission jack, the floor jack that I got underneath the transmission. And then at the same time, I'm going to line up the motor mount right here. And also I'm going to reach around the side. These transmission mounts are flexible, so you can maneuver them to line up the holes there and back here. So once they're all lined up, then I'll lower it all the way down and let it sit down. Then I'll put the nut on the top over here and tighten it down. And also earlier we took the nut off back here. I'll put that nut back on and tighten it back on that motor mount back here. So I'll tighten it all done. I'll lift the car back up and put the 4 nuts on the transmission mounts and tighten those up. Then I'll put the tires on and the lower shield on. So my car didn't come with the neutral safety switch. I went ahead and put that on too and routed it up through. And I just used the old witness mark or the paint marks when I start and just lined it up the way it does. But if it doesn't start after you're done, you may, if yours did not come with a neutral safety switch, you may have to adjust it. It has a little slight adjustment up or down to get it to engage on the starter. So after double checking all that's hooked up, everything is hooked up, I'm confident that I've hooked everything back up. So I'm gonna go ahead and put my splash shield back up and put my 2 wheels back on. What I'm going to do is take the 2 main bolts that went in the transmission on the top of the bell housing. So the one here and the one just a little bit to the right of it under the throttle body. go ahead and put those in, tighten those up. So next I went ahead and put the starter in and tighten the two main bolts on. Now that I got all the main bolts on the transmission are bolted up, I'm going to start on this back side and I'm going to start plugging in all the electrical connectors. And basically I'm going to work my way from the back around this way like this and plug in all the sensors, electrical connectors, and also any of the brackets that I may have taken off, like the little 10 millimeters, the holding the wire looms down. I'm going to put all that back on. So start this way and just start plugging everything back in and double check everything. And then and don't forget the sensors behind the underneath the thermostat housing there, and the ground wire here that went to the thermostat housing too. And you bolt that up there too. So you'll just just start from the back, like I said, and work your way around until everything's plugged in and tightened back up. First thing I'm going to start with is fishing that vacuum line that we fished up here through and plugging it back into the vacuum switch. Okay, so after starting in the back and plugging in all the electrical connectors, remounting the looms to the brackets, plugging in all the sensors in the back, getting the ground cables, all the brackets that we took off, the ground strap for the battery cables, the starter all hooked back up, all the looms are back into their little clips, all the sensors are plugged in, and the cool thing is all the sensors will only plug into so the brown one goes into the brown, the black goes into the black, and so on and so on. And on my transmission, I ran into a little thing where this was originally supposed to be bolted here, the ground cable here, but it's not. It hasn't been tapped and threaded, so I'm going to have to do that and put the bolt in. But most likely yours will probably have the bolt. So after you're sure everything like that's all plugged in, connected up, go ahead and install the transmission cooler line here. And on this one, on my transmission, they have a filter, so I'm going to cut this line, and then it's the out line towards the firewall, which is the return line. It goes back here in the back. They want me to install the transmission filter, inline filter, so I'm going to cut a piece out and install the filter right here. Now that I got my filter in, as you can see, the flow goes back towards the transmission. This is the return line. Everything is hooked up now. Before I put the battery tray back in, I'm going to go ahead and pull out the fill plug. So I'm going to unbolt. I'm going to take this out. Now we're going to install the bottom portion of the battery tray. So I went ahead and started the bolt because it has a slot in it, and then I'm going to slide it in the slot, and then I'll tighten that bolt up. Now you can go ahead and install the battery tray and all the bolts and tighten it up. And install this plastic portion of the battery tray. And after that's installed, then you can take your coolant reservoir bottle and slide it down into the little groove that you took it out. Install the battery hold downs, and the battery cables. Now I'm going to install the air filter, the air inlet box, and the top cover here, and all the hoses that connect it to it. My transmission already comes with most of the fluid already in it. They recommended I only put about 3 quarts in this car, so I'm going to put a funnel from the back and pour the genuine Honda genuine Honda transmission fluid. And also I reconnected my power steering, high pressure power steering hose here, put the 2 tins in, and now I'm going to fill it up with genuine Honda power steering fluid. After all the fluids are back in it, then I'm going to reinstall our coupler here. So I will slide it back up and put it on, and then what I'm going to do is the wheels are straight and the steering wheel is straight, and I'll slide it onto place, and then I'll put the bolt through, and I'll snug it up, and I'll in a second I'll go after I start the car up and run it through all the gears and double check my transmission fluid. If I have to drain some out, I'll drain some out. If it's good, then or if I have to add or whatever, I'll do that. I'll let it run and go shift through the gears a couple times, let it run here and warm up a little bit. After it's warmed up, I'll test drive the car with this cover off, and then that way, if the steering wheel is off center to the left or off to the right, I could just pull over and get out of the car and slide the coupler off and move it left or right to make it straight again, because it doesn't have a master spline. So that's what I do, and once I get it straight where I like it, then I tighten the bolt here and the bolt below. I tighten the 2 bolts, and then I just put the cover back on. Then I put the cover back on, And once you got the cover back on, that'll complete the transmission replacement on a 2002 Honda Accord. I'm Brian Essa from How To Automotive. I'd like to thank you guys for watching my videos, encourage you to subscribe, and invite you to head over to the howtoautomotive.com website for more valuable videos like this. Thank you again for watching.